Less than 30 seconds now in regulation. Could this take extra time? 16 seconds. Here's Dyal. Send it up at the point, J. Lalu. Call midget now, but Matt, 6 seconds, 5, Dalfan coming out. He gets around in 2 seconds. He's got to do it quick. Judith scores, 1 second left.
And we are back with the second, third. What are we calling this? Is this the second installment? Does the first count, or is that like the return?
First one. Oh,
Yeah.
that's the first one. This new iteration.
Yeah, I kind of feel like this should be number 2 almost. The first is, kind of like the prequel. It's like The Hobbit, you know?
It's like The Hobbit.
Yeah.
Because it sucked? Because it went on for too long?
No,
We
because
dragged it out way too long?
no, because we did it like we should have in one movie instead of 3.
Okay.
And we didn't bring in fucking people that weren't a part of the actual story like Legolas.
Yes, like.
But that's neither here nor there. That's fine. Anyway, so yeah, we're back with another episode of the Faceoff. I'm here with Antonio Fluso, Antoine the Swan.
Antoine the Swan, yep.
You're in Seattle, right? Seattle forward extraordinaire.
Yeah, Seattle. Yeah, the crab team, the juice team.
More importantly, the juice team. Yeah.
At the time of this recording, the undefeated juice team, which probably will not carry forward after 6 hours from now.
You have no faith, dude.
Nah, the team's good. Juice is good. Team. Then the rest of us are a team.
That's right. You guys will kill it in the non-existent playoffs.
Yeah.
I've
I get
noticed
messaged about every day. Pretty much.
There's been a number of references, even just in the Philadelphia chat, to the cup, which, like, I haven't said it yet. I haven't been the one to be like, well, guys, but I don't know if everybody is aware yet that there is no playoffs. There is no cup.
I'm not sure that people are aware that there's a schedule. I think like a couple guys might know that there's actually a schedule for this.
I'll be honest, I haven't opened the schedule yet. I'll be completely honest with you.
You'd see that there's no playoffs.
Yeah. Yeah, I was planning on just showing up when Zam told me to, so.
Yep. Well, that's a good way to go about it.
Yeah, I'm blindly trusting Zam. Anyway, okay, so we're going to pick up where we left off last time. So those who watched the last one, the big topic of discussion for us was sort of why the game / the community died, and is there a way back forward for it at this point in time with everything that's gone on, with all the time that has gone by since we started doing all the LHL seasons and everything, because the last one was, I believe, started in October of 2018, so we're coming up on 2 years. And a number of people who listened brought up the fact that we didn't talk about the impact that PubStars and to a lesser extent LHLStars would have had on the sort of downfall of the community. So I figured we'll start out quick here for a few minutes and chat about that before we get into the meat of this one. So I'll throw it over to you first, Tony, and we'll start with PubStars because chronologically that was present first. For those who might not be aware for some reason, PubStars was purely a matchmaking version of Pubs, and the idea was that it would assign an elo to every single player and then attempt to make balanced teams between red and blue, randomly picking people from the player list, and it would try to balance out their elo on both sides. So red team's elo was roughly equal to blue team's elo, or as best you could. That's the way a lot of multiplayer games work. So it's based off the same thing that you'd find in like League of Legends, Dota 2, Counter Strike. You have your elo or your matchmaker rating, depends on what game you're playing, but it definitely had a lot of problems in execution But I'll share my opinions on that more once we hear from you, Tony.
Okay. Well, I'm sure, well, those of you know about PubStars, and anybody who knows me, which is probably a good overlap of the people that would listen to this, know that I didn't like PubStars pretty much at any iteration of it. I was never a fan. I played a lot early on, and then I played sporadically here and there. And so,
Mostly
I,
for like warm
yeah,
up purposes or like to
yeah.
stay fresh, right? Not really.
Yeah,
Yeah.
not because I never hopped on really because I felt the urge to get on. Like I most of the time would honestly have rather not played the game than played PubStars for a lot of the reasons that people who played in it didn't like it. Or those who didn't like it. Not that everybody didn't like it. I mean, there are a whole lot of games played. It kind of spoke for itself
Oh,
that
hundreds.
a lot of people wanted it.
Hundreds. Yeah.
Yeah. So try to be I'll try to be a little objective about my thoughts on how it played into the league, rather than just like I feel like it'd be disingenuous not to come out and say like, "Hey, I didn't like it," though, because I didn't, and I a lot of the time asked for it to be at least temporarily shut down, like during the draft. So anyway, my when I first saw it come in, I thought it was fine. And I thought, okay, it makes pubs active, and that's good, and that's fine. But really, I think we saw as it went on that new guys weren't really playing it a lot, and when they did, they weren't getting anything out of it. And I really think it played a big factor into stalling a lot of people's development. A lot of, lower end players, at least, like people like, Guy, who is like, he was just getting better playing it. Like somebody who's already high end enough that it didn't really matter. Like, he play a bunch of different roles in that situation. But if you're kind of a lower end RSLer, new guy, JSLer, there's it was a really toxic environment, and you don't get a lot of puck touches. You don't you don't really learn a lot playing with one or two LHLers and then a couple other guys who are of various levels of talent in whatever position.
Not a great environment in general to be
No,
learning how to play the game. At least learning not the
no.
basics of it.
Yeah. And I mean, pubs, we're seeing it now, though, at the same time. There's a couple of new-ish looking guys. I'm not 100% like how long they've been around, but there seems to be a handful of new guys playing like right now that, and they just can't compete in pubs with us just because of the level of talent of the players that are left in this game. But even back then, like there were a lot of players around that would have been suited more to play with new guys or worse guys, and it just for their sake, it just never seemed good. You get less time, if you're you only get to string in one or maybe two games together if you're a new guy, and it's against LHL players where they're just destroying you. And yeah, I always thought it was just really bad for player development. Whenever we had a recruitment, I always pushed to try to shut off the PubStar server for a week or two, which I honestly don't remember if that ever happened. Like maybe
It might have
once.
once, yeah.
And yeah, so just because it was so hard for new guys to get into games. But I mean, like I see the need for it. Like obviously you want matchmaking, but with a game so small and with such a small player base, I really don't think, you know, it it would have mattered that much. It would have made that big a difference rather than just keep playing pubs. I think it killed the normal pubs for better or worse, but like people, there were always games. Like it's not like people weren't playing the game before PubStars came around. I never thought it was very necessary,
So
as fun as it was for a handful of people.
so I think there are a lot of sides to this when it comes to PubStars, and I think just to answer the original question first and get that out of the way, I do think it contributed to the the downfall of the community. Um, but I don't think it was all negative. I think there were positive
Hmm.
elements to it as well. So first and foremost, just an issue that I had with PubStars in general, even though I loved the concept of it and was in full support of it being a thing, um, a big issue that I had with it, especially once we got to see it, is like you said, the small community. And when you have a community that's so small, and each season we'd have, like 100 accounts or something like that that'd be registered in PubStars, um, when it's that few people, it's really hard to get an accurate rating in a system like that of any individual person. And as a result, because the individual ratings are never really accurate to what a certain person can contribute, it results in a lot of teams being heavily imbalanced, which was one of the big reasons why people wanted to go to PubStars in the beginning. Was one, because if you weren't holding down one and two to get into a pub, there'd be, as we've seen recently, right, there'd be many instances where you just can't get in. But two, it also prevented team stacking and stuff like that.
Also, hey,
But you,
last night we were doing pubs. Otto didn't get into 5 in a row.
yeah, I believe that. Lewis
Yeah.
missed like 5 or 6 in a row a couple nights ago too. Like it happens, and it's
It's
definitely
got to be
frustrating.
got to be a bit of an honor system here if we're not gonna bring ranked pubs back. I think
Right.
something's gotta
Well,
something's
that's
gotta
a
give.
that's a separate discussion. So, but
Yeah,
anyway,
I'm
it
just I'm
doesn't
just saying.
it never accounted for things like making sure there are two defensemen on a team, making sure there are, two forwards on a team, making sure there's at
Or
least a
the
goalie.
a
Like
goalie, the most
it
important one.
it never accounted for anything like that.
Oh,
And you also couldn't get subs, which was really frustrating. So if somebody had to leave or go AFK, you're forced to be down a man for the rest of it, which sucks. So there were a lot of issues that I had with PubStars on its own, but I do think that, or I'm pretty confident in saying that there was a lot more hockey question mark games being played when PubStars was out versus when it wasn't. It definitely drew in a lot of people to play the game more regularly that didn't beforehand. And whether that's because they enjoyed the elo aspect of it, or whether they enjoyed the like having stats for the games, or just the more fair games in general, in theory, um, whatever the case was, there were a lot more games being played. But when you tie extra importance to it, in the sense of like, okay, there's, a rating, you have a number that's assigned to you. You don't want it to go down. You have stats there. You want your stats to be good. And you combine that with the fact that now you don't get to choose who you play with. So you're forced to play with people that you might not like or might not be anywhere near close to your ability level, which makes the game less fun for you. You combine all those things, and it wound up creating a even more toxic environment than regular pubs were. And I think the height of PubStars was honestly the height of the toxicity we had in the league. And I'm speaking as somebody who was here for the entirety of it, because we certainly had plenty of problems back in the days of 4v4 when a lot of people who are still around right now weren't here. We had tons of issues. We had more player suspensions back then than we did in the 5v5 era. But I think in general, the toxicity level that came with PubStars was absolutely a problem. And you mentioned the new guys coming in. I definitely agree that it stunted their development. And that's not to say that like a newer person or like, an RSL player can't be playing with an LHL player or can't learn anything from that. But there's a separation, or there's like in my mind, there's like fine building blocks or fine lines that you cross as you're developing as a player in hockey question mark. And that's because there are all these cliffs that you have to get over and over again in order to keep moving up. And a lot of the times you get over a hump and then you stagnate for a couple months before you get over another hump, and then you stagnate for a couple months. And that first hump you have to get over is learning the base mechanics of the game. For those who have been on the subreddit recently, I was explaining this to that new guy who's building this, whatever virtual reality hockey game. The basics of the game are really hard in hockey question mark. Learning to stick handle when you're standing still, learning to stick handle while you're skating, learning to pass, learning to shoot, learning to receive, learning to look up turn, learning to position yourself to play defensively or position yourself to get open for a pass.
To
Um,
spin shot.
all that's a little advanced. Come on now.
Mm-mm.
But all the base mechanics, right? Like if you want to play even at an RSL level, you really need to have those base mechanics down. And playing in PubStars is not an environment that is going to teach you those base mechanics. Those are things you need to learn by practicing on your own, by practicing with, a JSL team, or playing in scrims, or playing in a JSL game. Like that is what the JSL was there for, what the NADT was there for. That was like the purpose that all that served. And when we lost that as a place for people to start learning, PubStars is the only place. And it makes it even worse for those players because they can't learn there, and now they're getting shit on by all the people who don't need to learn that because unfortunately they're bringing down the quality of the game. And it's not their fault because they don't know any better. They can't do anything else, right? So it's not like it's their problem that they're creating, but it's an unfortunate circumstance of trying to mix the high level LHL players with the new people that are just coming in that need to be able to bridge that gap. PubStars is the place for RSLers to start to become LHLers and for LHLers to fine tune their mechanics to be more consistent, not the place for those low end guys to learn how to become and work towards being that middle tier
Yeah.
of RSL.
And
So,
and we were really in desperate need of those guys coming up towards the
oh,
end of
absolutely,
the community. So
absolutely.
it really, I think that was such a focus that we never were able to really fix. Was the lack of people getting any better. Like there were so few guys coming up and actually getting better by the end of that.
Absolutely.
PubStars was definitely hurting that a
And
lot.
and that this is probably a topic that we'll want to save for a future one. I think we've noted this as a potential discussion point, but just in general, like player development throughout the course of HQM history, where did that go wrong? What could we have done better? There's a lot of stuff we could get deep in the weeds. I mean, we've only touched on the PubStars aspect of it, and even that has been kind of brief. We're glossing over it a little bit. So let's save the rest of that topic for a future discussion because
Mhm.
there's definitely a lot of stuff to uncover there. So we'll leave that to the side now. But in general, consensus, I think we both agree. It seems like that PubStars while it had positive aspects to it and it did positive things for the community, at least early on in its life
Yeah.
cycle, on the whole and by the end, it was definitely a net negative in terms of what it contributed to the community.
Yeah, for what we needed versus what it was at the end, which it did.
Agreed.
You're right. It did breathe sort of a new life into the game when it came out, and like people played it all the way till the end of LHL. So people, like it was popular. There was a need for it for some, but yeah, in terms of the community eventually dying, it, it
Yeah.
played
Yeah.
it played more of a part than I think maybe
There's
some realized.
there's a number of things that could have been done differently with it. Like you said, shutting it off more frequently, having much shorter seasons that are like, 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, something like that. There are a lot of things that could have helped it, I think, to reduce the negative aspect that it had. But yeah, it definitely wasn't a benefit by the end. Let's put it that way.
Hmm.
LHL stars, really quickly,
Hmm.
didn't last very long. That was around the time of season 19 anyway. And again, for those who don't know what
Towards the end
LHL
of it
Stars
too.
was, I had even forgotten this myself until a day or two ago. LHL Stars was pub stars, but with a limited subset of people that could contribute to or play in it. And that was run basically to eliminate a lot of the people that we were talking about, eliminate the newer players and eliminate the players that were really toxic or just straight up couldn't keep up with the higher level or higher tier of players. Um, it did kind of kill PubStars towards the end, which I know was a very contentious thing on its own. Not that killing PubStars was necessarily the worst thing, but the competition between those and the fact that LHL Stars was always preferred when possible um, was a problem for a lot of people. And that even further contributed to cutting off a lot of the lower end players that we needed to start filling those roles. So again, that's a situation where like, I get why it existed and I
Yeah.
get the premise behind it. Being able to give the higher tier players an environment where they can focus on playing at the highest level and practicing against other players who play at the highest level, because that's where the best practice is, was definitely something important that would have been nice to have. But again, the limited size of the community meant that you
Yeah.
can't have
If
that and pub stars coexist.
if the
Um,
community was bigger, that's definitely something that could have been looked at.
which I think
It's
in addition to that, right, if the community was bigger, the PubStars elo would have been more accurate, which would have meant that eventually we could have gotten to a point of not let's just make the most balanced teams possible, but let's take the people with an elo higher than 2500 and you guys get your own games. The people under 2500 get their own
yeah.
games, which is like what a real matchmaking system does, right? You don't take a diamond player in league and match them with a bronze player because they even out to be a gold player and put them up against other gold players. It doesn't work like that. No matchmaking game works like that. They
Yeah,
always
including hockey question mark.
Exactly. They always put you up against a team that is supposed to be, relatively equal to your skill, provided that they're able to find you a match within a set period of time and you're not like sitting there and matchmaking for 30 minutes or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And we just couldn't do that in HQM. So I think a lot of that would have been worked out naturally just by the nature of having even double the number of players that we did. And just as a brief mention, I will point out that I think we had nub stars for a little while, or there was like a plan
I,
for nub
I,
stars or
I
something.
seem to. I remember the name. I don't remember if anything came of that.
I think
Oh,
that
I
was a
forgot about
Payne.
that.
I think that was a Payne Retsky project to try and
Yeah.
create a PubStars to address
I
the newer
feel like they were
players.
playing. I feel like games were played there.
Yeah, I don't remember if it was a proper matchmaking thing or just
Yeah.
meant to be like a captain situation where they got to play
Yeah.
wherever. But anyway,
I.
okay,
Oh,
let's
I
cut it
hold on.
off.
Can I say
Yeah, go
one
ahead.
thing about
Go ahead.
LHL Stars that wasn't touched on? Because I think LHL Stars, especially at the stage of the game and everything, is a bad idea for all the reasons I said Pub Stars wasn't. Essentially, you cut out the new guys who we needed. But at the same time, when people criticize it, it's like, oh, if anybody were to criticize LHL Stars, it came in so late in the game. And I remember by the time LHL Stars was out, we, as in the sort of head, the BOC and kind of the GMs and the people who played, the leaders of the community, and for what the community was at the end there, we all knew we were done. Like we knew this was it. We
We
were
were on
right
death's
at the
door.
end.
Yep.
So when LHL Stars came out, they're real like I think a lot of those guys who felt left out, they probably feel like that's what killed it. But to us, that was just something we threw in to try to enjoy the last little bit of
Yep.
HQM because
Yep.
we knew we weren't coming back after season 19.
Agreed. Agreed.
So yeah.
Okay. So on that note, let's move forward and let's get into today's actual topic that we were going to
How
discuss.
long was that?
Um, we're about 22 minutes in,
Yeah,
so we're
I
doing
thought
good.
so.
Yeah, we're
Yeah.
doing good. We'll do our best to keep this under an hour to those who are listening.
We'll see if
Yeah,
you're lucky.
we'll see. Okay, so today we wanted to take a look at something that's a little bit different, a little more like specifically LHL based and not so much centered around the community, but take a look at some of the best and worst draft picks of all time. And this is again purely focused on the LHL. We're not going to get into the RSL or the JSL. I personally don't feel qualified enough to take a look at all those anyway.
Mm-mm.
Maybe that's something we can talk about in the future. Might be an interesting sort of side topic
When we
there.
get
So
Monty on here.
yeah, Monty, Nina, and Nova Star, right? Let's bring them
Yeah,
back, the crew. Anyway, okay, so um, let's get right into it. I think we should start with the worst and then go to the best, with the bad news first,
yeah.
then better
And we'll
news.
be working our way backwards chronologically.
Yes, so we
These aren't
chose
ordered in any
not
way.
exactly. We chose not to rank these. It's really tough to get a firm ranking that like it makes logical sense through all of them, especially because a lot of these are hard to compare. Like, how do you compare a goalie to a defenseman to a forward? How do you compare fifth round players' expectations to an eighth round player? Like, there's a lot of minutia that goes into that. So, we just chose to sort of list off a number of them. And like Tony said, we're going to go chronologically, starting from most recent all the way back. We are leaving out 4v4. We're doing just 5v5. 4v4 was so long ago. There were so many unknowns. The game was played very differently. A lot of the people that played back then don't even play now. So we're kind of cutting that off for the most part. Um, so with that, should I do? You want me to start, Tony, or you want to go first?
You got the season 19 one, I think. So or season
Well,
19,
we're doing
18.
we're doing worst, yeah. So worst,
Yeah, we
worst
got the
draft
same one here.
picks,
We
yeah,
got the
worst
same one
draft
in season
picks.
18.
So this is kind of a joint one, which is, a little disingenuous to what we're doing, but that's fine. So I'm picking two picks that were both done by the same GM in back-to-back picks here. And I will throw up on the screen, if I can do it here, the draft board so that you guys can see it as well.
Should throw up the
Am I
stats
on the
after
right
too to
one?
justify
Yeah,
this one.
yeah, I will. Okay, so we're taking a look at the season 18 draft board for those who can't see it. The two picks that I'm referring to, which Tony is entirely in agreement with, is Dick McButts going number 4 overall in the first round, and joined with that, Lucic, who played under the name Pasternak that season, going 10th overall in the second round.
Yep.
So the two of them combined for a total of 30 points on the season, which is, for those who are aware of the legacy of those two players being two of the best forwards to ever play the game, not just in the LHL, combining for 30 points when neither of them missed a lot of games is really bad, really bad. And the two of them together, as I'll flip it over to the stats so we can actually see it here, as for some reason I'm on season 13. We'll get over to season 18. Dick McButts had a .78 points per game, and Lucic had a .94 points per game. I believe Dick McButts' .78 is the lowest
Yep.
points per game of a starting forward in 5v5 history
And
ever,
in LHL history, all the way back,
all the way back to 4v4.
I
And
believe.
Lucic's .94 isn't far behind it.
It's, I think, the second worst or third
Yeah,
worst of
and
all time.
and the two of them together, I mean, 30 points, less than a point per game.
Minus
They
43 and minus
combined to
40.
only miss 5 games on the season, combined negative 83 on the season. I mean, it was bad. It was really bad. And I don't want to keep shitting on them because they don't necessarily deserve that, right? But in terms of what they had done leading up to this, we mentioned in the first sort of return episode we did of the Faceoff, right, that Lucic had already been in kind of a downswing at this point in time. So seeing his numbers continue to trend downwards was not surprising, but him hitting this level of low was like really low. And seeing Dick McButts hit like a full point per game lower than even what he was the
Yeah,
season before.
he's another guy who's getting
Um,
worse, but not like that. Like,
yeah,
that was
not like
a
that at
drop.
all. The season before he had 30 points, 1.88 points per game, and then
Yeah,
the
wow,
season
that's insane.
after he had 14 points, 0.78 points per game. I mean, it was a stellar drop off. So yeah, the two of them, if there is a number one ranking, the two of them would take the cake for me personally.
Yeah,
Just by nature of, you know,
especially DMB at 4 there.
yeah,
Like that, taking that fourth overall and getting that level of production from
it's
what's
just
supposed to be your number one.
is
From somebody who
rough.
Leafs had such success with
It's
too in the
rough,
past.
especially when you look at, excuse me, the names afterwards, like Taze, Juice, Crab, Kiwi, yourself, Austin, BG, Ike. Like you still had a number of really proficient players left on the board. And I know none of those carry the same legacy necessarily that Dick McButts does for good reason. But yeah, it just is one of those like in hindsight, like, oh,
Yeah.
oh. Okay, so that's enough from me on my first one. Tony, you had that one as well, right?
Yep, that was
Okay,
my.
so let's go to your second one.
Okay, is this the most recent? Because I'm dropping down to
What?
season 15.
Okay, season
Is my
15
next
is,
one.
yep, the next most recent. Yep.
Okay, and this one, this one's a little weird. It's funny to say it so early because for the most part, when you think of worst picks, it's a player that is taken high. The expectations are high, and they don't live up to them for the most part. That's sort of what it is a bad pick for what should be worst pick of all time. And the one I'm throwing
Well,
on,
not
it,
worst of all
yeah,
time, just
yeah,
just some of the worst of all
yeah,
time,
some
right?
of the worst of all time. Some of the worst picks ever, for
Yep.
the most part. Yeah,
Hmm.
most of the worst picks ever are guys probably taken in the first 2 rounds. And this is the only one on the list, I think, for either of us that is outside of the starter rounds, even. And it's sort of a pick that sums up his career. Like, you could kind of probably pick this guy drafted anywhere, but Claude Giroux at 34th overall, sixth round pick for Kapanen,
Yep.
his Philadelphia Flyers, which is one of the worst
Bring up
teams
the
ever.
stats while you're
Yeah.
talking.
Claude taken in the sixth. Claude is one of the most net negative players in LHL history. For those of you who don't remember him or didn't play with him, he would usually, except in season 15, put up points and still he'd tank his team. He would make everyone around him worse. His team, his Tampa Bay team, used to win the games that he wouldn't show up for, and then they would lose all of the ones he was there for. Like, they would hope that he wouldn't show up because of how much better they were with the backups than him. Even though he could put up points, he's one of the worst minus players ever. and
He
I
is
don't
he is
I
the
don't have it.
second worst minus
Yeah,
player ever. There's only
yeah,
one player worse than him, which is Kipe at minus
oh,
133 for
poor
his
Kipe.
career. Claude was minus 129,
Yeah, and
including 4v4.
yeah, players who played with Claude. I don't have this with me now. I made it a little while ago for Jay Lalu for fun. Is players that were his forward partner would always have like their career worst performance, and then the next season would have an amazing season. Like it's not a coincidence when it happens every time. And in season 15, Claude hadn't played. He had been retired for a while, and he came back, was drafted, which and then used in 12 games, and the team was just tanking. It was horrible. It was Taze was on the team, and it's one of his worst seasons he ever had. He was traded, and he salvaged it a little, but
It's one of
it
the
was
only
rough.
seasons that Tays ever finished as a negative player. Not that I think
Yep.
plus minus is everything in the same way it's not in real
No.
hockey, but Tays, on the flip side from Claude, is the highest plus minus player in
Yeah.
LHL history at like plus 350 or some absurd shit. And he only had like a losing team once or twice, and he was only negative in a season once or twice, and that came
And
with Claude.
yeah.
So, and if you want to
And this
use the Jay
Claude is
Lalu
one
example
point per
too,
game.
I
Oh, just
believe
horrible.
if you want to use the Jay Lalu example too, I believe Jay Lalu and Claude were the starting pair on Philadelphia in season 8, if I remember
Yep.
correctly. And then Jay Lalu comes back with Dildozer, who I am pretty infamous for not having a super high opinion of him. Um, he and Dildozer went on to become one of the best offensive pairings in the league, largely because of Jay Lalu. So it makes you wonder how much Claude held him back in season 8.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's that those Philly teams from 8 to 9 are the same team, except Claude is replaced by
Yep,
Dildozer, and the jump is Jay Lalu goes from barely over a point per game to leading the league in scoring.
yep.
And season 15, Claude's taken not to start. He ends up starting, and I remember watching these games and just seeing him tank the team. And I remember you and me both, Dial, talking to Cap about it because Cap was obviously bummed out that his season was going so poorly, and we were all telling him, bench Claude, don't use him, use anyone else because he is making the team around him worse. And by the time that they had good enough attendance that Claude wasn't playing, it was too
It was
late,
way too
and
late. Yeah.
it was past the halfway point of the season. Like he played 12 games, and
Yeah, and they
it
they
was
finished 4
unacceptable
and
for what he was
16.
doing.
They finished 4 and 16 on the season, which
Yeah,
is one of the worst records that any of the 5v5 teams had in the final like 5 seasons.
yeah.
Like that was one
And
of
Claude
the
is a
lowest low
huge
seeds.
reason for
Yep.
that.
Yep.
He was unusable, which he wasn't unusable before when because he used to put up closer to 2 points per game. But I mean, he was still a net negative. His teams never accomplished anything, and he dragged his teammates down, especially his forward partner. Um, but in this case, he was 1 point per game. No 1 point anything, just 1.00. Just the offense was dried up, and he was just still a frankly worthless team player. Not that he's even like he wasn't even that bad a guy anymore at that point, but there's a difference between being a teammate and your team play, and he had no regard for his teammates for using them for playing anything that resembled a two-way game. He brought nothing to the table for that Philly team.
Agreed. Agreed. Okay, so we'll keep this moving. So my next two actually both come from season 14.
And the two worst, you
Where
have two worst picks in 14?
yes, I have two
Oh,
worst
yeah,
picks in
you do. I
season
know. I know
14.
what I
Yeah.
know what the second one is now.
Do you have anything
We
else in 15?
Nothing else in 15.
Okay, so we're gonna go to 14 here. Hold on one sec while I get these on. Putting on my panties. All right, season 14. So I have two from this draft. Like I said, we'll start with the first one, which is
Yeah,
the worst of them. But I'll name both of them before we go take a look at the draft. So the first one I have is Tanuka V,
Big
otherwise
V.
known as Big V, who went fourth overall in the first round. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah.
Or Big V.
Big V, like DMB, Dick McButts, had a very storied history in the LHL. He was one of the original players in season one. He was playing the game before even I started. He was a fantastic player back then and was a fantastic player through a lot of 4v4. He was one of the best defensemen early on in the game, alongside the likes of Tim Barrett, Taser, and then eventually Go Leafs Go as well, and Fuzzy Wuzzy were some of the big names back then. But Chinook V, or Big V, was sort of almost chief among them. He even had an award named after him back in the day too. He was a fantastic goalie as well. So he had a reputation that was well earned for being a legitimately, very talented player. And when we shifted to 5v5, things really started to fall off for him. He was still useful and usable. He won a cup in
Won
5v5.
two, didn't he?
Um,
Oh no, just the one on 10?
I think just the one on Edmonton.
Oh,
He
he
might
made
have
the
won a second
finals
one.
on Winnipeg though.
Right.
Is what I'm
Yeah.
thinking of probably.
So he definitely still had value, but every season it gradually got kind of worse and worse. And it's not quite the situation where you look at like DMB or Lucic, where there was just this wall they hit where they just fucking dropped like a rock in terms of production. But for Big V, it was more of a gradual decline. Down into a situation where he wasn't able to contribute as much anymore. And season 14 was really the pinnacle of that. And him
He'd
being
taken time
taken
off too.
yeah, and him being taken in the first round at pick four, like I get it because you have Gabe as a GM and you want a defenseman in that round. So like I understand why he's doing that. You want to pair like that's generally a really good strategy for a first round forward GM, especially somebody who's capable of being a goal scorer. So like Lucic, myself, Otto, Gabe is another example. In this case getting a really strong defenseman leads to a really balanced team, which gives you a better chance of winning the cup. Uh, and so, the thought process of taking defenseman on board with it, but taking Big V when you have BG and Taze on the board is kind of like why?
Yeah.
you
It
know,
seems, I
like
wonder, I don't remember exactly, but I would wonder if because it is Gabe that maybe Taser or BG said something.
that's the only thing I can think. And I can't imagine that Taze would have said anything because he's not the type of player to do that. But I wouldn't be surprised at all if BG told Gabe outright he didn't want to play for him.
Or
So
Gabe
I'm
probably knew that
I,
Taze wouldn't have wanted to
Yeah,
move him,
I'm
even if he
sure
didn't say
that
it.
informed his decision, but nonetheless, there are better things you can do with that pick than taking Big V, like taking BG or Taze anyway, and trading them, or trading the pick, or forcing them to play with you, or drafting like a forward or something like that. I mean, we had Marchie go off the board in the second round. Even Icy went off the board, who was pretty early for where he got drafted, but like Icy still was better than Big V that season. I mean,
A
there,
lot of players.
you went in the third round. Like there are a
Yeah.
number of people.
And
Austin in the
14? The
fourth.
second round. Second round.
Season.
Yeah, see? Well,
Oh,
trade
right,
up.
right,
I
right,
was
right,
traded
right,
up
right.
before.
It's
Yeah.
yeah, it's the trade thing that's messing me up. But anyway, Austin went later too. Like there are a number of people that could have performed just as well or better. So that was a pretty bad one. And then following up in that, in the second round in this draft, at the end of it, at pick 12 was Galchenyuk. And this is not actually a unique occurrence for Galch. If you go look back through the draft board, a weird Gauch has a weird history as a player. He was overdrafted and underdrafted consistently. There were a lot of times where he'd be picked like really late, later than he should have, and a lot of times where he'd be picked in like the second round for no reason. And Gelch was always one of those people who had a lot of potential to be really good. He had the skill to be like a starting player, but his consistency and his mentality just were never there, and he was way too easily, shaken in a game, which really threw off his ability to be the scoring presence that a lot of teams needed him to be. And in this season, he was coming off of a backup season on my team in season 13, where he came in and we started using him as our second defenseman, despite the fact that he's a forward by default. And he actually filled in and did decently well for us. So I'm sure that inflated his value to Lucic there. But yeah, he was never good enough to warrant going as high as he did. Certainly not over a lot of the names that went after him as well. And it's not as bad as the Big V one, but it's still up there in like a Probably should have done something different with that pick.
Yeah, he ended up playing
Gouch,
9 games that season and he was traded.
yeah,
Like it seems like
Gouch finished the season with 6 points, and for reference, Big V finished the season with nine
yeah.
as a fourth overall pick, 9 points. So not
And
not
minus
great.
20 on
Uh,
D. Again, plus minus isn't everything, but when you're you know, the worst minus on the team.
yeah, exactly. And if I where are they? Here's Gouch. Gouch was minus 17 with 6 points in 9 games, and Big V had 9 points, minus 20 in 20 games.
Both
So,
traded.
yes, both had been traded off of their teams,
One of them traded for
respectively.
Dial though, and the Taze,
True,
and I think
yes.
Taze and Big V for you and whatever throw in.
Yeah, I forget exactly what it was, but yep. Okay, so again, to keep it moving, my next one is season 12. Do you have any in 13?
Do I have any in 13? Not for worse.
Okay, so I'll go ahead
Actually, you know
straight.
what? No, I will say. I will say one
Okay,
that I have it in the list now. I didn't tell you because I had. Well, we'll get into it a little later. Well, you'll see now. But Matt third overall in season 13. I added into my collection of bad Matt picks
okay,
because
yeah.
Matt,
Well,
this wasn't as bad because he showed up and he wasn't too bad in season 13. But when you leave Crab and Otto on the board,
to pick Matt.
that's that's trouble. Otto, who won Best D that season, and
Hmm.
it was really his first when he
I mean,
like Calgary is
you
kind of
got
when he took
Taze
off.
on the
But
board
yeah,
there too.
oh yeah, Tays on the board.
Yep,
Even like yeah, even like BG over Matt
yep.
would have been a better pick.
Okay, we'll get into the bad Matt picks because
Yeah,
anybody who's
that's
played
just
this
yeah,
game, anyone who's played this game knows the bad Matt picks are coming. We'll do all of them at once.
yeah.
Um, okay, so my next one is Cap in season 12, and this is kind of the outlier for me, and I think it's an outlier for both of us. And if you're looking at what we both picked for a lot of this, so Cap ended up being picked in this season eighth overall, which for somebody who's a secondary forward for their whole career or a supporting forward, and that's not meant to be a negative term whatsoever, but just he's not a goal scorer, right? I mean, everybody has different roles. That's not the role that Cap fills. For him being drafted as the number one forward onto a team as a secondary forward, especially at eighth overall, is really suspect. Uh, Cap has a ton of value to him, but this again ties into what we talked about in a previous episode where I brought up that I think
Overrated
Cap is one
players.
of the most overrated players, not because he's bad, but because GMs overrate what the expectations are of him or what they think they can get out of him. And I think this, more than anything, was the paramount example of that, where he was drafted way too high because of the value he provides. But for what they needed as a team, he was not the pick there. He was not the choice. I mean, you have Gabe and Timu that are both still sitting there.
You got to
Uh,
wonder if Doucette and Zam had a conversation about not picking Timu or Gabe.
I mean, I'm sure they did,
Yeah,
right? Like, because those are two players that, historically, I mean, Timu not so much, but Timu has been a toxic teammate in the past. That is something that was a problem previously. But for Gabe, that's obviously, a lot of people attribute toxicity to Gabe just naturally. Um, so it kind of, you can start to see why they might have made that decision. But when you break it down, it's like, yeah, I mean, you're leaving yourself so open though, and at a certain point as a GM, your responsibility is to set up your team for success to win the season. We're not talking about Friday night hockey, we're not talking about HQML, we're talking about a competitive environment where you want to build a team that can succeed. And by picking Cap at the start of the second round, their draft was immediately dead as soon as that happened. And that sounds that sounds like fairly egregious and harsh, but at the same time, it's like, well, now you don't have a scoring threat at all. And that showed the whole season. I mean, they ended up making the playoffs, I think, right? Or
yep.
I think just
Yeah, they were
barely.
swept by Cleveland.
Yeah, they just barely squeaked in, so you could say they had some level of success. But and
That is
defensively, the team had a decent core defensively, so at least they had something. but you need to be able to score at an LHL level, and they just didn't have it. And it was very clear from day one that that team was going to struggle because of that. And I think if you go and talk to any of those players too that were on that team, they'll tell you the exact same thing. So,
Cap will tell you that. Cap was telling us
oh, I'm
that
sure.
when
Yeah.
we came up with the question. Cap, he knew right away that that wasn't going to work, and I'm pretty sure that is one of his least favorite seasons he ever played.
Yep. Agreed. Okay. So my next one is season 7. Do you have any before that?
Uh, for worst, yeah. Are you sure you got that's it? You jump right from 12 to 7?
Yeah, so I'm not
'Cause-
getting into the honorable mentions. I'm leaving all that till
okay,
the
well
end.
then mine, I have 8, 9, and 10, and it's all the
Okay.
same guy.
Okay, so I'll pull up 10 first so we can see it,
Yeah,
but I'm just gonna highlight it in advance because we all know what's going on here. But here,
yeah,
bring in the doormats.
yeah, yeah. So Matt, those of us old enough to remember, which is probably everybody who would listen to this, remember the era of seasons, basically the for the start of 5v5 until season 10 was the last time it happened, because he stopped playing. But Matt used to get drafted in the first 3 picks, and he would either not show up, underperform, or both. And season 10 is the both. He falls into the both category. Uh, the Florida team that he was on, drafted expected to carry, is maybe one of the most infamous in all of LHL history for being the worst team ever at a
One
point.
of the worst
Yeah,
5v5
I
teams
think. Yeah, I
of all
think.
time.
Yeah, if when we talked about it, we talked about it, right? On that first face
Oh,
off?
I think
Yeah,
we
yeah,
did. Yeah,
the one
yep.
week, yeah. So that was one of the ones. This one came up, and he points out by the end of it, there were trades, and the team was at least sort of competitive by the end. But I would argue for that stretch at the start that Florida was on is
They got
maybe
mercied like
the
6 out of
worst
7 of
team.
their first games.
Yeah,
I mean,
probably the
it
worst
was
team ever.
awful. Yeah.
Yeah, and Matt either not playing, and when he did play, not playing well. Not that it's his fault. Like it's the GM. It's on the GM to understand what Matt was bringing to a team at that point, and they just never did.
Well, and if I remember correctly too, Evcobb was MIA because
Yep.
he had real life issues that prevented him from being there. So not only did they not have their first round draft pick, or when they did, he was playing poorly, but they also didn't have their GM, who was their top defenseman. I
Yep.
mean,
Your top player then is then your goalie and K Bomb, and the next is Johnny Hockey.
yeah, which,
It's
you
that
know,
team was set up for failure,
yeah. And
and
you might see names like Guy LaFleur, Drag, and Capital Skis on there, but you
brand
have to
spanking new.
remember that yeah, that those are 3 players who showed up around season 8 and were in the JSL and the RSL and were just working their way up to LHL rosters. And this was in a lot of their, well, I think in all 3 of their cases, the first time that any of them would see legitimate, meaningful LHL time.
A
And
guy was in a finals the season before.
what a disaster of a
Yeah.
time to finally get to experience that. I mean, in a lot of cases, like all 3 of those players turned out to be pretty good, but we're almost fortunate that that season didn't ruin those players.
Yeah. Well, they were traded. Both Guy and Drag finished on the Philly team, which they have good stories from. Zam's team with Gabe on it. There's
Oh
some.
yeah.
Oh yeah, that's a fantastic team for another time that probably
Hmm.
deserves a look. As the Zam Gabe team. Yeah, Guy and Drag both finished under point per game. Probably a lot to do with the time they spent on Florida.
Oh yeah, for
Like that
sure.
is just,
For sure.
yeah. Yeah, Matt talked about wanting to train those guys, practice with Guy and Drag and improve them as it went on, and that didn't. It was
So
he just that was it.
just for reference to finish out the Mats, Matt was also picked 3rd overall in season 9 by
Yeah,
McJaba on Quebec, and that was
another bad
after.
infant.
So if you remember, a lot of us were worried that because Jabba originally had the first overall pick, that he
Yeah,
was going to pick Matt at the very beginning, and we were warning him against that, saying don't do it. So he traded down, which was good, like in theory, right? If you
Yep.
if you want Matt, I guess trade down so it's less of a concern. But you still picked Matt in the first round, picked him
Yeah.
at third overall, and traded down when you had both myself and Taze on the board, and Otto a little bit farther down, and Crab a little bit farther down. Like there was, and Jay Lalu. Let's look at him down at the third
Hmm.
round, who ended up leading leading the
The
league in
league
points that season. There's a
won
lot of
MVP,
players that
playing
could have
MVP.
been taken instead of Matt. So that was bad. And then in season 8, Matt went number 1 overall. And if you look at the
Yeah,
stats, Matt's stats season 8 weren't quite as bad.
they
But
were
that was
extremely good. In fact, that's
that
one of the all-time points per
well,
game season.
if you look at the end, but if you
Yeah.
like, if I were to pull up, if I could, I might be able to, but I can't at this exact moment. If you were to look at the stats of him when he was on Winnipeg because he got traded, it would look a lot different because he was on Winnipeg for a little, didn't make a lot of games, wasn't playing very well, and ultimately got traded. And unfortunately, that pick really sunk the Winnipeg team that season.
Yeah, that
Um,
is the best Matt drafted here, but it's also probably the worst pick because that pick threw Winnipeg's season
which
down the
is which
toilet.
is unfortunate, right? Because you get
Yeah.
Matt and Otto in the first 2 rounds, like holy shit, what potential that team has to be successful, right? And then to see it all come crashing down and them become the worst team in the league is like just ugh, brutal.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay, any more you have before season 7?
That's it for my worst picks.
Okay, so we'll go to
That's
season
all you've
7, which will
got.
be the last worst one. And this one, I want to apologize to the guy I'm calling out here because you're never going to watch this, but I do love you, buddy. But K-Bomb being
Yeah.
picked 6th overall. In general, a goalie in the first round, usually not a good idea.
I
Uh,
can't think of that ever happening and
even
working
I think
out.
it's the only time it ever
Yeah.
happened where a goalie was picked in the first round in the LHL. Even an elite goalie like Fat Squirrel or Kiwi or Meat Sale or Dalf or Gabe or PK. There's probably a Dalf. Did I mention him already?
Yeah, Dalf. Yeah,
Okay, okay,
he
okay.
just Dalf was the one before PK.
Okay, all right.
Dalf, did I mention Dalf?
um, so anyway, even the elite goaltenders like that, like Briz back in the day, right? All of those still wouldn't have been worth a first round pick because even when you're that good of a goaltender, you still can't single-handedly win your team games like that. As a goalie, you can prevent the team from losing, but you can't win the game for your team. And I'm a firm believer in that. I know a lot of people will say like, "Oh, the goalie stole the game," and like, okay, he prevented you from losing. Yes, but he can't score goals for you. The best he can do is keep it 0-0, but he can't generate offense for you. You still need somebody to do that, and it's the offense that ultimately wins you the game. We don't evaluate like the winner of the game by who has the best save percentage. It's who scored the most goals. So drafting a goaltender in the first round is not the play in just about every case. And K-Bomb had just come off a remarkable season where he was the number 1 goalie in the league, but he was also on the number 1 team in the league on a team that fucking smashed everybody. So it's really easy to look good on that team. And I'm not trying to say that K-Bomb didn't deserve that, but expecting him to repeat that performance when he's your number 1 pick and you're now building the team around him is a lot to it's a lot to expect. It's a lot to put on the shoulders there of that team and anticipate them making that work. So anyway, just something I wanted to throw out there, which is also interesting while I look at it. Go Leafs Go and Cap were also drafted by New Jersey, who ended up being the forward
Second and third
pairing
leading
on
scorers.
Atlanta. Yep, second and third leading scorers. So, and they had Tall Midget on that team and Gabe. So the talent
New Jersey,
really.
hey, New Jersey was the first LHL team I was ever really aware of because that was my first season in the RSL, season 6, which is the same as LHL season 7. And
Yeah,
Ace got on that team, the New Jersey, and he was our only LHLer. So I would get stories from Ace every RSL day of him coming back and telling us about how horrible it was on New Jersey and how awful Gabe is. That was my first peek into the LHL I ever got, was that New Jersey team. So thank you, Gabe, picking K Bomb at 6 and ruining the morale of an entire roster.
Yep. Okay, so I do have a few honorable mentions before we close out the worst draft picks of all time. So again, going chronologically, I had Lucic season 16 on Dallas. This is, not one of either of our like top five necessarily, but if you go look at the stats, it was a bit redeemable for him. He still finished the season with
By the
about
end.
30 points.
And Dallas succeeded at
And
later on.
Yep, and Dallas made it to the finals. So it was not the end of the world. It was not the worst thing ever. Both sides ended up working out and making the best of the situation, which is why I didn't pick it as one of the worst. But if you were to go back and look at just the stats from the time that Lucic was on Dallas, we were a terrible team. Lucic was performing terribly.
And
I
he was
was
dragging
performing
you down.
terribly. It was a bad situation for everybody involved. And moving on from him was the best case situation for both him and our team as a whole. So that one was up there. I also had another one of my picks, interestingly enough, season 13, picking Sheepas, who is Fat Squirrel, as a
Yeah.
defenseman. That was something like Fat Squirrel had been drafted as a defenseman twice before this, once by
Once
Leafs
by you.
and once by me. So the fact that, and to clarify, he was drafted first by Leafs as a defenseman, didn't even make it through the preseason before Leafs moved
Dropped.
on from him and dropped him outright. Then I drafted him as a defenseman season 12. He played a little bit for us, but I ended up replacing him with, I don't even remember who it was. Um,
Like Tickle.
yeah, somebody.
I don't know. You
Fucking
picked it. I don't know.
he played for us for a while, but again, it wasn't working out. It was clear that it was not the play. And then season 13, I picked him again. Despite knowing that, I picked him again. So this one is bad, not because of where he was picked, but because sort of like the stupidity of doing the same thing over and over again and hoping that this time it would
Hammering
be
the circle
different.
into the square.
Exactly. And just
Yeah.
like, God, fit in this fucking hole.
Yeah.
So that was pretty bad. Going back to
And
go ahead.
well, we brought it up earlier with the Gouch pick. That's Gouch was Fat Squirrel's replacement there, which is what propped his value up to have
True. That's who it
Lucic take
was.
him in
Yep.
the second
Yep.
round.
Yep.
That's all circle. All bad picks are all linked together.
Okay. So final few honorable mentions here. This is another
Dishonorable
kind of
mentions.
joint one. The entirety of the Chicago season 11 draft.
Yeah, it was a bad draft for Guy.
No, not really. The majority of the picks weren't really that bad, in all honesty. They weren't that terrible. The main issues were Trev Crow at 7th overall, again, filling a need.
Over Otto.
Yeah, but the big thing is picking him over Otto. Trev ended up finishing only with 8 points on the season as well.
And
He is a
traded.
defensive defenseman, but like still only 8 points out of your second overall or your second
pick, seventh.
pick on the team, 7th overall player in the draft is rough. Trev Crow's not a name a lot of people will recognize, but he was generally a good defensive defenseman back then.
Cup winning the season before, and
Yep,
2 seasons before that, and 3 seasons before that. He was still in the his own little prime.
Correct.
Even though he wasn't a dynamic player, but he was on winning teams and he contributed to all of them.
But you see names like KS Otto there, and it's like that is probably the only time, or one of maybe 2 times, where KS Otto and I could have been on a team together, and denying the opportunity for that sounds as crazy as it probably was. That is something that has never been explored in an LHL setting, probably for good reason. But that would have been like the what if that you leave on the board there by picking Trev Crow over that is like just
Because
it's
Guy
just
would have been
terrible in
playing D,
hindsight.
would have become a defenseman.
Yep.
It probably all works out for the league.
I mean,
in the long
Guy
run.
is a good defenseman anyway, as it is. Like, anyway, it's neither here nor there. But the other 2 picks that were a part of this that kind of sucked. One of them not really Guy's fault, but well, neither of them were Guy's fault. The first one is Briz. at pick 13. Briz was a really good goalie, but he ended up only showing up for 2 games before never showing
And
up
when he
again.
was there, he
So
clearly wasn't interested.
yeah, that was a bit of a disaster. And then where Ace was picked at 25th overall was actually a Chicago pick. It was traded to Colorado because Ace refused to play
At the
because
draft.
Briz was on the team, if I remember correctly. So
Yep.
Ace didn't want to be the backup, so he refused to show up and
Yep.
like at the draft and
Even though
said,
we
"I
knew
don't."
Briz was going to miss games already, it was probably going to
Exactly.
be a 1A, 1B situation, which it
Exactly.
turns out Ace would have became the starter immediately.
Yep. And then Ace ended up going to a team that had 3 other goalies on it in Doucette, Sully, and Nina. So
Yep.
there were 4 people that could play Chi on that team, and I remember him not being happy about that. But anyway, so both of those picks, neither of them are guys' fault. Both of them would have made a huge difference to the team if they had actually been there. Uh, but yeah, losing both of those sucked because of the consequences of it. So yeah, that goes through all the worst players, which does bring us up to an hour. So Tony, I will ask you, do we want to do the best picks and
Yeah,
make
I
this
think
one
we can do
longer,
it.
or do we
I think
separate it out and do another one?
no, let's make it let's make this one just a little longer. Maybe we can get through the best picks probably pretty quick. I don't think you have too many,
We
right?
we both have like 5. I have some honorable
Yeah.
mentions for it as well that we'll
Yeah.
touch on
It's
quickly. So
I think we can get through this. I
okay,
don't. Yeah,
okay,
it's good.
let's push it. Let's push it real good. Okay,
All right.
so best overall picks. I have one from season 19. Do you have
Yep.
one from earlier than
It's
that?
what earlier? What?
Or I guess, yeah. Do you have
Yeah.
one from that season as well?
Yeah. It's the same one, and it's more in the honorable side, so you can talk about this
Okay,
one.
all right. So yours was more of an honorable mention, but for me, this I thought was it's one of my picks. So kind of I always fucking hate this. Every time I like have to talk about something that I think I did well, I fucking hate that. Anyway, so Quacky Face at 24th overall in the 4th round, he was the last starter that was taken in this draft. He went on to score 72 points that season and was like the 3rd or 4th highest scorer on the season. Let me pull it up on the stats so you guys
I
can
guess the
see.
fourth.
He was the 4th, yep, behind myself, Meatsale, and Otto. He scored 44 goals and 28 assists. So he was incredibly good. And my main reason for picking him here is to get that level of production out of what is normally like the final starter taken. Like if you go look at other people throughout LHL history that are taken in the 4th round, most of the time they're going to be like second defensemen or supporting forwards or a goalie. Pretty much in every case, those second defensemen tend to get like, 10 to 15 points. A secondary forward might be like 15 to 20, maybe like 25. It's usually the last goaltender taken, so a lot of times those tend to be in the high 50s, low 60s. So to get a top 4 performer who was as proficient as he was in the 4th round is a huge steal in my opinion, and just one of the highest value picks you can get,
Mhm.
pretty much of all time.
Yeah, which is why though all of that is why I have it as sort of an honorable pick. The only thing I will say against that is like that he was very good and worked. The reason he fell being that he didn't have a great season before, and not only was he not outstanding, like or on Vancouver, he eventually got traded and did better. It seemed like he was doing well with you, and when we saw him with a different team, nobody else really nobody thought he was that great, which is like he's better than people gave him credit, but also it seemed like he was a little toxic to some people,
Oh,
which
he
again,
yeah, no,
like
he
it's not
definitely
a
was.
yeah,
He definitely
it,
was.
yeah. So that's kind of the reason why I didn't quite have it in my top, but I did put it there because 70 points is absolutely absurd for anyone, let alone the last pick of the starters.
Yep.
And he
Okay,
is good.
my next one was season 14. Do you have any before that?
Oh gosh, where is it? Oh yeah, I do.
Okay,
In
what
fact, I
season am
got
I
a
going
couple
to?
before that here. So my next one is season 18,
Okay.
um, which is 30th overall. Goose was selected, and that he not only did he win the cup that season, which is the all important thing to do. He led the league in save percentage. He won best goalie. He was absolutely outstanding. It was the best season Goose ever had, probably.
Yeah,
Uh,
huge steal.
yeah, and to go in, what is that? In the 5th round,
Yep.
the 6th round,
Yep.
maybe is
As a backup, basically. I
yeah,
mean, I know he wasn't a backup on our team because our team didn't have a fourth round draft pick,
yeah.
but
That is
still,
the starting goalie spot.
yep.
But yeah, that is an incredible bottom of the 5th. That is a great pick. That uh, where you get the best. It's funny. The best goalies drafted pretty late a lot. It's funny, and Goose is no exception here. That was a great season he had and great playoffs. That's an all-time goalie performance that I don't think is looked at uh, quite like we look at Kiwi and Fat Squirrel, but
You know,
Goose
I think it
was
would have
so
been
good.
I think it would have been lauded a little bit more if we had continued to play longer. Like a lot of what helps reinforce the reputation that a lot of the other players' great seasons, does. Like when Kiwi had his fantastic season, and Goose was great, but he wasn't quite on that level, to be fair. But still, a
Yeah,
lot
no,
of those seasons developed a legacy to them because of how long we kept playing afterwards. And it was always like, oh man, remember how good he was a couple seasons ago, or remember how great he was, or how hard he was to play against that season. When we stopped playing in season 19, a lot of those conversations kind of disappear. And
yeah,
unfortunately, a lot of the like really good performances that people had in those final seasons, I think gets kind of lost as a result.
yeah,
So,
Goose won 3 cups in a row. The final 3 cups, Goose won,
yep,
and it's something that like he knows, I know, but like
most people
that's
probably
that's
don't.
yeah, they
Yeah,
probably don't. Like
yep.
that's nuts.
Goose killed the league.
Yeah, with his elite goaltending performances.
Okay, any other season 18? Or are we going to 17?
Going to 17 here.
Let's do it.
So I got 17. Should I save it? It's sort of more on it. Well, no, it's fine. I'll say it here because I
Okay.
kind of had it in the list. This was my preferred instead of 19. Quacky Face goes 29th later than he did and ended up becoming a starter. And he didn't put up any 76 points, but he was such a huge part of our Anaheim team that we had a real struggle putting together that final roster spot, trying things out and trying to get Canoodle to work. I ended up taking a lot of face-offs for the team, which even though I was a defenseman and I was playing defense, I would play C or
And
I would
then
set C
rotate
and then
back.
I'd rotate
Yep,
back
I
and play
forgot about
D.
that. Yeah,
Yeah,
Canoodle would be back on D and then come up on forward. Yep, I
yeah, and
remember that.
like we didn't know exactly what we were gonna do, and Quacky kind of came in. I think I might have taken some face-offs for Quacky too. I think he struggled a bit, but
Yeah, because we didn't
he
track
really,
face-offs back then.
yeah. But I remember doing that a little then too. And if you look at Quacky's face-off numbers when we did track them, they aren't very good. And
It
I
was never
assume
his
they were.
strong suit.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
no, it doesn't really matter. The face-offs aren't a huge deal, but because especially he really solidified their final roster spot, and he really helped put Anaheim like over that hump we kind of had. Even
Agreed. Yeah.
though there was a hump we hit the bottom of a mountain that we couldn't see the top of in Kansas City, but uh,
Yeah,
ignoring that,
that
Quacky
was always
Face
a
really
disaster.
for a backup pick to come in and be extremely good and just click very well with you, which
Yeah, I think
was
that
the
was the
first time you would have
highest.
seen that.
I think that was the highest points per game that I had in
Hmm.
5v5 was that season, or it was one of them. So,
3 points per
considering
game, 45
considering
goals.
the like
Yeah,
the things we went through to try to get that roster worked out, it does speak volumes for what Quacky did add when he got there. So,
yeah, yeah. It's pretty late pick, so I like that pick a little better than the season 19 one because I feel like even though he exceeded performances, it is an all-time great pick that uh, we kind of knew he was going to work with you. He'd be close to 2 points per game at least. So that's I think kind of the I had high expectations for Quacky in season 19, I guess, even though he went so late.
that's fair.
And a lot of that's due to season 17, seeing what he could do.
Okay, so what's your next season?
15,
Okay, 15. So you're
15,
ahead of
another one
me
more
by
mean. Yeah,
one. Yep.
yeah. So
That's fine. I did a bunch in a row last time,
yeah,
so
yeah.
let's
So
uh
season
let's get over to 15.
yeah 15 had a wonderful little player drafted at 21st overall by the name of Kill Pessel, who anybody who played in season 15 would probably remember uh, seeing Kill Pessel score as much as he did, and probably having some conversations about whether or not he was lucky or Lucic was carrying him
That was his
or what
breakout
was
season.
that was his breakout season, which was then he kind of broke out into nothing. He went back into that backup role right
Yep.
after. It's
Yep.
such a weird thing, which again I more blame on his deployment
There's a
and
30 for
usage.
30 about
Yeah,
KP's career
yeah,
that can be made.
Kilpessel should have had a much better career than he did. But season 15 is a great example of his potential and how good he was. And I remember people thinking Lucic might have been carrying him, including us, because again, another linking back to the bad pick, Lucic, 6th overall, taken by you the next season, one of your honorable mentions, was because we saw him playing with Kill, lead the league in assists, and we thought he was carrying Kill Pessel.
Yep.
And I think when you look at what Lucic amounted to after that, Kill was really holding his own there.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he's the 4th leading scorer as a 4th round pick, the number 1 option on a team, a rookie. Like all of the things that come together for Kill
I'm
is
pretty
just
sure, both of us acknowledge that, like you said, this is the outlier season for Lucic in the final like 6 of
in his
his career.
decline. Yeah,
And
from
the only difference here to potentially have brought more out of him was KP. So
yep,
it definitely lends a lot of credence to the fact that KP brought a lot more to the table than what most people gave him credit for, myself
at the
included. I
time,
mean,
yeah.
he unlocked something in Lucic to be able to get more out of him, and that given how difficult that was for everybody else afterwards, that says a lot.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
you couldn't do it.
I know, no, no, I could not. So
No, like I'm just yeah. So Kill, he was doing something right. Never got used properly again. Such a late for to get that much out of such a late pick to literally save a guy or salvage a guy's career in Lucic from your 4th round pick is just awesome. Anyway, that's actually one of my favorite picks on here. Like it might not be the best, but I love that Kill season. It's funny as hell.
no, that's a really good one, and I'll show his stats real quick for the season. Ended up with 46 points.
Yep. 4th
So
in the league.
yeah, so definitely put in work that season for sure.
A
Leading
lot
that
of
team in points too.
yeah, the damage he was doing to the boards with that puck is something that we'll never see again.
Will never be undone. Okay. So season 14 finally, right? We don't have any more in season 15.
Yep. Nope. I
Okay.
don't have anything 14. This is all you.
So this one kind of doesn't fit the mold of everything else that I've been doing. I've been looking at a lot of like people who were drafted later, but exceeded expectations. But this one I had to go completely opposite of that just because of how dominant this player was. And I'm sure all of you know it's coming, but this is KS Auto, pick number 3 in the first round. Generally, I think it's hard to say that a first round draft pick is the best pick you could, that could have been made or one of the best picks ever. But I think it goes without question here, given the sheer dominance and the like dynasty basically that was started with this draft pick. Um, Picking Otto here for Guy was just unbelievable. I mean, the Calgary team, if we had let them stay together, would have kept winning cups for a long time. And
Mhm.
they had a chance, even when Otto had his own team in season 16, they had a legit chance to win again. So that was an incredible, incredible pick. Otto ended up finishing with 71 points. Season 14 and 15 Calgary, as all of you know, were just a force to be reckoned with, two of the best teams we've ever had all time. And Otto's performance in both of those seasons are two of the best individual performances of all time, leading the league in points and goals. 71 points and then 74 or 75 in season 15. So, but yeah, it all started with this pick. And I think there, you look at the draft board, there's a number of things that Guy could have potentially done to switch things up, but I think he had learned from the mistake of leaving Otto on the board season 11 to not do that again. And if you look at the rest of the players he had available to him, Guy at this point was still not confident in himself as a primary goal scorer. So this, to an extent, was actually the only option he had left to get that. And holy shit, what a what a fucking steal!
Yeah. picked him once and got him twice.
Yep, picked
It's
him
good
once,
stuff.
got 2 cups out of it. 1 pick,
Yep.
2 cups. It was amazing.
And also an elite trade down by him because Meat was scared that he was going to take DMB, and Meat. I know for a fact Guy was going to pick Otto at
Yep,
2.
yep.
Absolutely fantastic. Good work by Guy. The opposite of season 11 here, where his team just works out perfectly for him right out of
Okay.
the draft.
Well, Guy deserved that.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Oh, he
All right,
fucking
so
worked his ass off.
my next one, which I think we both share this one, right, is season 13.
Yeah, the one you maybe foolishly skipped when we went over.
Yeah. I still don't
You
know
had to be
how.
reminded.
I don't know how I missed that, especially because of the other one I grabbed, which is a similar vein to this. But so we both had this one, which was Kiwi, pick
Yep.
number 22 in the 4th round. This was his first season as a goalie, and Zam and Crab, because I think Crab had an influence on this. I don't think it was just Zam. Waited to get their goalie until later on into the draft and
That's a
reached.
real crab strat,
It is.
waiting to
It
get your
is a.
goalie.
He did it in this tournament too. It's a standard
Yeah.
Crab play. Anyway, so yeah, Crab and Zam took a flyer on Kiwi when he hadn't been an LHL goalie before, and holy fuck did he kill it. Kiwi was incredible that season.
Swept the goalie awards.
Yep, swept all the
First
goalie
time.
awards.
First time it happened. And then he did it 2 more times after this for 3 in a
Yep,
row, which
yep.
is just wild.
Had 3 shutouts, 15 wins out of 23 games, 2.22 goals against average, over 5 saves a game, 70.69 save percentage. Just a unbelievable
8%
season.
higher than the next.
Yeah, just an unbelievable season from a goaltender, especially somebody who was a rookie who didn't even really play a lot of goalie in RSL or anything. He was usually a forward.
No,
So
he played 1 season in the RSL
for
before this one.
for him to
That was it.
make that change and be so good at it was incredible. And he ultimately became one of the best, if not the best goalie that the LHL had ever seen. So you got to give Zam and to a lesser extent Crab the credit for being willing to make that sort of leap there, because what a difference that made for that team. I mean, the team was excellent regardless, but still, that was the cherry on top that really sealed the deal for Nashville.
Is that because his name's Don Cherry there? Is that what that was?
Nope, nope.
Alright.
Okay, so my next one's season 11. Do you have a season 12?
Season 12 best? No.
Okay, so we're going to season 11, which
Season 12, Tony Flo. That's actually
yep,
best pick of all time.
yep,
But
yep, for sure.
no, glossing over that. Yeah, no, I don't have
So
anything.
season 11, I won't go quite as in depth on this because this is almost the exact same situation. But we mentioned his name earlier, Ace. Ace, who had turned down the Chicago backup position because he didn't want to play behind Briz, ended up getting traded to Colorado, and from there went on to be just like Kiwi, a 70% save rate goaltender who almost single-handedly carried his team to relevancy. Colorado was not a world beater by any means that season, but it was Ace that kept them relevant and kept them in the playoff discussion the entire time. He had 2.89 goals against average, 70.29% save rate, and that's on a team that had a losing record. They went 9-11 on the season. So having over
Oh
a
God.
70% save rate on a team that has a losing record versus Kiwi, who had like a 68 or 67% save rate, like that's fucking bonkers. Like, that is insane, being that good. So yeah, it follows along with a lot of the same logic as Kiwi, taken there in the 5th round instead of the 4th, but exact same thing, even as Goose, as we mentioned earlier, right? Just these late round goaltenders that really were able to go above and beyond. And Ace was another situation of somebody who at least was playing some goalie in the RSL, but he kind of came up out of nowhere to an LHL job and just fucking smashed it. Unfortunately for Ace, he didn't go on to have quite as good of a rest of the career. He definitely started to fall off from there, whereas Kiwi was able to keep the dominance going. So a little bit different to that end, but same logic behind both picks here. Which brings me to my last one, which is again the exact same thing. So I apologize, this is a little boring, but Fat Squirrel, pick number 22 in the fourth round, same place that Kiwi went 3 seasons later, interestingly enough. Fat Squirrel, who, again, Crab, unsurprisingly, takes a late goalie, takes a flyer on somebody who was a backup the season before and played a little bit in the RSL, but didn't have a solid tenure or a
Had a great
career to build
playoffs
off of. Um, 70.5% save rate on, again, a
in the
team that,
regular season.
yeah, this is a regular season. We'll get to the playoffs in a second, but in the regular season, 70.5 on a team that went 13 and 12. So not a losing record, but still basically a 500 team. 2.78 goals against average, and he actually had a losing record in the regular season. He was 11 and 12 in the regular season in games that he played. So
That's incredible.
yeah, it's fucking unbelievable. Unbelievable the performance that he put in. And for those who were around back then, you'll already know where I'm going with this, but that squirrel basically single-handedly won Edmonton a cup.
Yeah. I,
I
on the
don't,
other hand, if goalies can't win games, Fat Squirrel won a cup.
yeah, yeah, Fat Squirrel is probably the only person who would ever make me question that philosophy that I have of goaltenders not winning you games. He had an 80.3% save rate in the playoffs.
Yep.
80.3 and a
And his team was
1
getting
point
outshot bad.
and a 1.77 goals against average. And his team averaged 9 shots against per game while only generating 5.7. For reference, an average LHL team usually gets about 7.5-ish shots per game, for and against on average. So they were considerably worse on average by a shot and a half per game on defense, and were much worse on offense by almost 2 shots per game on average. So this was a team that from a skater standpoint, they were getting outmatched in just about every game they played, and it took them almost all 14 games to win. But to win both rounds, that is, they won in 6 in the first round and then won in 7 in the finals. But holy crap, did Fat Squirrel carry the fuck out of them, and it is probably the first and last time that that will ever happen. I mean, we talk favorably about people like Ace, about people like Kiwi and the seasons that they had, hitting 70%, which is no small achievement. I mean, that's fucking incredible. That's like hitting 3 points per game as a forward. It's really fucking hard, but it's amazing when you do it. Hitting
Yeah.
80.3 is
And
so just like, I don't even know how to characterize that. It is up there in my mind. Like, this, his playoff performance is in the same tier of what Otto did in his 2 dominant seasons and what
mhm,
Matt did in season 5 of
5
the
and
4v4
4v4.
playoffs, where he had 6.4 points per game in the playoffs. Those 4 performances, or 3 if you want to just merge Otto's 2 together, the Fat Squirrel playoffs, the Matt season 5 playoffs, and the Otto in season 14 and 15, are the 3 greatest individual performances that we will ever see, ever, in hockey, question mark. Like, that's not going to change whether or not the LHL ever comes back. And holy shit, did Fat Squirrel
Yeah.
dominate. And
It's
the playoff run alone is enough to make that pick worth noting in this list. Adding in the regular season just is like, it's one of the top picks of all time. Like,
yeah.
it's just I don't even know how else to say it, right?
Yeah. A little off there. I was looking at it because I knew Kiwi was close. Kiwi on Calgary in season 14, 79.5 save percentage, which is really close to Fat Squirrels, but he's facing only 5.5 shots a game, which is the lowest a team ever let up in the playoffs.
Yeah.
And
Eh,
it's different. As good as Kiwi was, there's like a different level of like
there's
the shots
context
Fat
to it.
Squirrel was
Yeah.
facing, and the,
There's
the volume of them and the quality were
Yep.
just absurd that he
There's
was going up against.
there's absolutely context to it. And you don't want to minimize what Kiwi did that season because,
No,
I mean, he's
no, it's an all-time
he's
great season.
he's 1% off of what Fat Squirrel did, and having a 1.13 goals against average, which on its own is fucking incredible. But like you said, you're only facing 5.5 shots per game, and I'm willing to bet that most of those 5.5 shots are not high quality scoring chances. A lot of those are going to be coming from, longer shots that are farther away, or shots that are being taken through, six and stuff like that. You don't get clear lanes for things. Calgary was a dominant team in every aspect
Yeah,
except,
Edmonton was not.
Exactly. And that's the
Yeah.
difference for me is that Fat Squirrel had the card stacked against him. If you compare Edmonton's like skater stats to any of the other playoff teams, they look like a non-playoff team. Like if you put just about any other goalie on that team, there's a good chance they don't make the playoffs at all with the way that they played. Like they were not a good team on the whole, right, from a skater
Yeah.
standpoint, whereas Calgary was utterly dominant there and Kiwi was excellent, but Kiwi got to enjoy the success of playing behind a team that supported him really well, whereas Fat Squirrel was just fucking fed to the wolves the whole time. I
Yeah.
mean, he
And
the
he
the
was up
level
to the task.
the level of effort he had to put in to achieve those numbers, it just makes it just puts it a step above what Kiwi did, unfortunately for Kiwi. And, it's almost rough to say because Kiwi will probably never get the opportunity to be in that situation to see if he can mimic it, to see if he could be as good as Fat Squirrel was that one time, because those situations are so rare that they come about, right? Um, but yeah, I think the Fat Squirrel one has to be the greatest goaltender performance and one of the greatest player performances of all time. So,
Yep. It's great. If you got any more picks after before that one,
no, so that's
the
it
Denver.
for
That's
my top.
I got one more,
Okay. What
and
season we going
that's
to?
season 9, the one before this one, and that is my man, the always excellent. Yeah,
I know
you've got
exactly
him
what's going to be.
highlighted.
Yep. Yep.
14th overall pick, Jay Lalu,
Yep.
which is an earlier pick than some of the like 4th round and later, but Jay Lalu going in the 3rd round here as the number 1 forward. You're taking your number 1 forward in the 3rd round, I mind you, because Zam takes Taze and Briz first. Good
Yep.
picks,
Yep.
but banking on
It's a
Lalu,
risky
who,
move. It's a
yeah,
risky
it is. We're
having two
talking about taking
defensemen.
Cap in
Yeah,
the 2nd on
exactly.
Buffalo, and
Exactly.
Lalu had like 1.1 points per game the season before. I
Yep.
was talking about playing with Claude,
Yep.
and this season he led the league in scoring. He won MVP, led the playoffs in scoring, won playoff MVP, swept their way to a cup with him
Yep. 8
leading the
0.
way.
They went 8-0.
Eh,
Won 4
Yeah,
games the first round, 4 games the second, and
yeah,
I think yeah, they had 3 overtime games in the playoffs, so it wasn't
yeah,
perfect, but I mean, it's
yeah,
about as good as it's gonna get, right?
yeah. And
So,
he like this is the only instance in LHL where the leading scorer in the league isn't taken in the 1st round or a GM, and it's a 3rd round pick. You waited till the 3rd round to grab your guy, and you got the best player in the league that season.
which is something to highlight itself, just reiterate that point. Every leading scorer in LHL history was either a GM or somebody picked in the first round, all 19 seasons.
Yeah.
And
One exception.
for Lalu to be the only exception is like, especially on a team that took the same risk that Buffalo did that we just shit on Buffalo for a little while ago, right? Like
Yeah.
taking that risk and having it pan out is incredible, incredible.
Yeah. It's yeah.
I
It's an
don't think
all-time
even
season.
Zam expected the level of performance that he got out of Lalu.
No, I don't think Lalu expected it. I
Yeah,
don't like just just a crazy all-around season, leading the league in assists too, with like it's nuts. It's
yep,
that's a season that it's one of the only seasons that I think anybody had that's similar to Crab's Cleveland and Nashville season there, where he was sort of hit the top of his game.
yep, yep.
Yeah, just outstanding 3rd round pick with a gamble pick that worked out better than I think anybody would have guessed.
Agreed completely. All right, so final few honorable mentions here to throw in, just for the sake of doing it while we have a couple minutes left here before we sign off for the day. So for me, one that I wanted to include, but he didn't quite make the cut, was Dildozer in season 16
16.
on Hartford. So as I mentioned earlier, I've never been one to be overly fond of Dildozer or his style of play, or not one to give him the credit that he probably deserves. But taken in the 4th round, 21st overall this season, and he ended up being the offensive threat basically for that Hartford team. He ended up scoring, I think it was 39 points. Let me pull it up. I'm completely on the wrong season. I need season 16. If I can get this going. All right, season 16. Yep, 39 points, 2.44 points per game, which is absolutely nothing to shake a stick at. He was their offensive carry, and to get him in the fourth round, similar thing with what I mentioned earlier with Quacky, being, fourth round, 72 points. Not quite as proficient as what Quacky was able to do, but same kind of deal here where you're getting remarkable production out of somebody in the fourth round, and that's excellent, excellent value if you can pull that out there. So, two other ones that I did want to mention, which kind of go hand in hand, and this has a lot of context around it to sort of explain it. But going back to season 12, looking at Cleveland here, Crab in a Tree's Cleveland team that ended up winning the cup. So I have two picks here. The first one being you, Tony, taken at 24th overall in the fourth round. Same logic here as with Dildozer. You were taken as a relatively unknown at this point. I mean, you hadn't been an LHL starter at all ever, and Crab just kind of plucked you up and was like, "We're gonna make this work," and it did. You guys were like the second seed team for the majority of the season before the Lucic trade, which we'll get to in a second. You excelled on offense. You had 36 points for the duration of the season, and you ended up having to play defense on that season, where you excelled there as well. So it was tremendous season for you. Really, really good pick for Crab. Again, seeing value in somebody that hadn't
Ace
really
told him to make
seen,
that pick, by the
yeah,
way. Yeah,
hadn't
that
seen
was
LHL time before, but it worked. It fucking worked. And going hand in hand with that, the other pick that I wanted to bring up, somebody who didn't actually play a ton this season, but whose pick, like, or where he was picked is tremendously relevant to the ultimate victor, is Guy Lafleur here at pick 26 in the fifth round. So Guy had what was it, collarbone or shoulder surgery or something,
shoulder
and
surgery.
couldn't
Yep.
actually play the game for
Till
the
about
first,
halfway
like,
through the season.
it was even longer than that, I think. And so Crab traded up to get him, to have him sort of in his back pocket. And the idea was that you would be the forward until Guy comes back, and then Guy fills in and takes over. And then you're there as the primary backup at that point to give them a solid foundation, can play offense, defense, whatever you need to. What ultimately ended up happening, though, is Guy comes back, and Crab leverages that to make a trade with Anaheim for Lucic. Lucic, this was probably the final season where he was truly like
He
incredibly
was good in
dominant.
13.
He was good in 13, right? But like
Led
this
the league
is
in
this
scoring.
is the last like
Yeah, this
Lucic
was he
season,
was
right?
winning games
You
by
know, like
himself.
this is the one, because at least the season 13, he had Timu and Otto around him that were both
Yeah.
performing extremely well. So it's hard to know at that point how much of it was Lucic versus how much of it was playing with both of those players. And just imagine Timu, Otto, and Lucic on the same team. The offensive firepower is just unreal. But anyway, he was able to trade Guy for Lucic, which ultimately was the difference between you guys being second seed and first seed, pushed you up over Chicago, and ultimately lifted you guys up to winning the cup. And it's not even the fact that he picked Guy to play Guy, it's that he picked him and was able to trade that fifth round pick for somebody who was taken first overall in the draft. And the value that like comes through with that is fucking phenomenal. Like, this one I have very strong feelings about because I don't think the trade should have gone through. I will forever think that. But the fact that it did go through is a testament to the fact that Crab is a phenomenal GM, knows exactly how to take advantage of any situation that he's put in, and knows how to properly evaluate the potential and the value in every pick that he has and every player that he has, and being able to basically turn that fifth round pick into the cup, because that's what happened, really, when you break it down. That fifth round pick is what won
Yeah.
him the cup.
Yep.
And that is to get that out of a fifth rounder is remarkable, regardless of who was actually chosen there. So, okay, so that does it for me. That's all the ones that I wanted to
Oh,
take a look at. Is there
one
any more
one
for you?
honorable mention. The final one. This is the most wild pick, and it's only honorable because it probably shouldn't even count. Because in the season 1 draft, which nobody knows what they're getting, everybody's brand new. Your own, everyone's favorite, Dyal, who from every draft that he was selected in from season 2 onward, he he went in the first 3 picks, or he GM'd or was protected. He never fell past the 3rd overall pick. And in season 1, Dyal went 22nd overall in the 4th round, behind some names that I don't recognize and some that I do, not for the best reasons. And it is just the wildest thing to see the all-time GOAT go in the 4th round, the first time he was ever drafted. And I think you told me like yesterday or whenever that was, that the only reason that pick happened, Taze, your GM, you messaged him and said, I'll play defense, so Taze picked you.
Yeah, so what Taze had done was, because this is what they did in like the VHL or whatever it is, the EA NHL league that was around back then. They were like player organized leagues because there was no like built-in thing into the game at that point. So they had something called the VHL, I think it was, like virtual hockey league or some stupid shit. Um, anyway, so they had this like radio program thing, because this was back before even like Twitch was super big. So it was this radio broadcast where you could pull it up and listen to it in a browser, and there would be a phone number that you could call, and it would call you into the radio broadcast with, in this case, it was Taze running it by himself because this was the first season, and Taze was like, "Oh, I'm gonna start a league and do this." So um, so I was sitting there listening to it, sitting on my couch with a bunch of other, people that are sitting around waiting to get drafted, right? And we get down to the 4th round, and I'm like, oh fuck, I want to get drafted by a team. So I sent Taze a message on Reddit because that was the only place I could message him, and said in the Reddit message like, hey, I think I signed up only as offense, but can you make sure that the GMs know that I'd be willing to play defense too? And he announces that on the radio broadcast as his pick comes up on the board. So what does he do? He drafts me immediately as soon as he said that. So I
Yep.
ended up on his team because I told him I was going to play defense. And
Yeah.
for those who may or may not notice, Taze had drafted KS Auto in the 1st round and ended up trading him, which is a nice, you know, we could talk about that in the future. It's one of the worst trades of all time, but he ended up trading
Shoop de
Auto
whoop.
away. So the starting lineup on the team was supposed to be Orban and Taze on offense, then Burn Wernham and myself on defense, and Sammy in net, and then Kipe as a backup forward. We had Wayne Train, I think, as a backup defenseman, Shoop as a backup forward, and then this 0-0 chubby guy as a backup defenseman as well. So that was
Hell yeah,
supposed to
season
be the
1.
starting lineup. Um, so it was a little ridiculous. I ended up getting a hat trick in our first game ever, and then he never took me off offense. So that's
Yeah,
that's how
that's
that went.
that's good
But
stuff. And then the following season you put up 100 points. First player to ever do that.
yeah, I love that story of us going from season 1 to season 2, but again, that's for a future time.
Yeah.
So anyway, okay,
Anyway,
so
great pick, Taze. Best pick of all time, probably. But it's season 1,
hey,
so
I mean, if I hadn't been drafted as a starter, it was a legit question whether or not I would have stuck around. So,
yeah,
and if I had disappeared from the game, I mean, who knows what happens at that point.
it dies at season 2.
So
Yeah,
anyway,
that's what happens.
okay. So we went over this time. This was a little over an hour and a half. We're gonna
Oh,
try and keep
sorry.
these. Yeah, I know. We're gonna try and keep these under an hour in the future. We're gonna do our best to do that. About an hour and a half will be our absolute limit. We don't want to go super long with these. If we have to go like 2 hours long, we'll start splitting it up into smaller sections. But hopefully you guys enjoyed this one as much as the last one. We do have a couple topics floating around for the next one, but as always, if there's anything you want to see us discuss, or have us revisit an old topic like we did with the community dying and PubStars thing, uh, please feel free to let us know, whether it's a YouTube comment, Discord comment, whatever the case is. I haven't been posting any of these on Reddit. Maybe eventually I'll start doing that. We'll see. But yeah, so give us a shout if there's anything specifically you want to talk about. I think some of the things we're considering looking at next time, which, sorry, we didn't get to it this time, but one community suggestion was to look into some of the hardest decisions we ever had to make as BOC.
Yep. My hardest
Between
decision is to end this now instead of getting to that question.
between Tony and I, we BOC'd. At least one of us was BOC for just about every single LHL season that happened. We were two of the most tenured BOC members, and everybody knows this already, but even the seasons I wasn't formally BOC, I was always involved in the decision-making process for things. So I got to experience a lot of that. So there's a lot of potential stories and things that we could get into. Might be interesting for that question to maybe bring in another commissioner as well, somebody who could get some insight into some of the seasons that we weren't GM for or BOC for. So I'm thinking maybe Cap actually might be a good one. See if we could get him on board for that to get some more insight into that because he GM'd for a few that neither one of us were present for. But yeah, that's something we can talk about. So that's one of the next ones we're looking at doing. Potential talk about that. Maybe talking about some difficult decisions as GMs. We do have a couple other ones on the table too, like best and worst trades of all time. Should be coming up relatively soon. We do want to eventually take a look at some more draft retrospective, maybe getting into a specific draft and looking at some of the better picks or even redrafting one certain season to try to get something that might look a little bit better out of it. So we got a lot of ideas on the table. Hopefully they are as entertaining as the last few have been. But yeah, let us know. And thank you for sticking with us for this hour and 40-minute adventure. Anything else, Tony?
Nope. Everybody, I hope you show up tonight, but by the time you hear this, you will have probably not showed up to 2 days in a row. Damn.
I feel attacked.
That's fine. Maybe you'll show up. We'll see.
Maybe. Don't tell Zam.
Okay, well, he'll know by now.
All right, fair enough. All right, we'll talk to all you guys later. I guess final thing to touch on now that I think about it is we're trying to work out a schedule for this for releasing these a little bit more regularly. We're floating back and forth between doing 2 a week or 1 a week. So that's another thing where if you guys have any feedback on that, please let us know. If you want to see 2 every week, we'll do our best to keep up with that. If you're better, if you feel like you can digest the content a little bit better when we're only getting 1 a week, please let us know that as well. The more feedback, the better we can do of making this most entertaining experience it can be. So
we're gonna try to shorten them, even though
yes.
this one we failed at doing that.
Yes. I mean, that's a regular for us at this point. So anyway, all right. Thank you for everything, guys, and we will see you next time.
See you later.